Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you very much for joining us here. I guess lunch hour is on, and I noticed that the bar is open as well, and that would explain the poor attendance in this auditorium. Hopefully, we'll see things pick up as we get started. Well, we're here to talk about, and the discussion topic is on your screens, media and the establishment. Is it an inevitable relationship of conflict? You know, and I think this sort of comes back to the larger issue and purpose behind what we do and why we do what we do. What is the role of journalism? What does good journalism mean? What is the establishment? Is the establishment only the political establishment? And, you know, an adversarial relationship, a relationship fraught with tension between the media and the government is not specific to India, and it's certainly not specific to this time period. We've seen this play out in country after country, and this has been a problem that media organizations have had to deal with for years, as long as they've been in business. But is there anything that's changed because of the change in the media landscape itself, because of the disruptions that technology have brought in, because the business model very often across a lot of media is broken? Does that impede or impinge on autonomy and independence more so today than it did before? I think some of these issues are issues that we hope to address on this panel. We're going to, Madhu told me, make this rough, and then she also added that keep it nice. So I'm going to try and find a balance between rough and nice as much as possible. Let's get opening comments, and James, I'm going to start by asking you for how you see things as they are today. Yeah, and I'm raising what Carl Bernstein raised as an issue. He said, you know, there has never been a golden age for investigative journalism, for instance, and let's not lament the fact that there is no golden age of investigative journalism anymore. The fact is that our job is to tell stories, to tell them as accurately and as truthfully as possible. So what do you believe has changed in our being able to tell stories as accurately and truthfully as possible?
So. We are in the golden age of investigative journalism. It's never changed. It's never gone away. There just isn't much gold left in it. We don't have the money to do it like we used to, but there's certainly plenty of will and certainly plenty of people out there doing it because it is so important. What has changed for these people is simply there's not as much support, and there's much more of a sense that what they can do will be challenged, and perhaps even violently challenged by people who think that the media is weakened and they can get away with it. Mm-hmm. We have to protect ourselves first and then report, whereas before we could report, I think, with less fear that something bad might happen, both to the journalists individually, to the individuals we write about, and the societies we cover.
Why do you think that's the case today, and what do you believe has changed? Is it the fact that there is much more institutional capture, regulatory capture, and the system has started to fail journalism and journalists, and hence this tendency of having to watch your back before you actually report and do a story?
Well, I think it's always been the case in different places, but a lot of it, especially in Western countries, is the collapse of the business model. It's given rise to a sense that we can't really press the issue, we can't afford to fight against a lawsuit, we can't afford security, things like that, so they can do things that they didn't do before. Also, there's this emboldening of public officials, I think across all countries, that they just don't feel that they need to be accountable to the media anymore because they don't feel they need to be accountable to people anymore. They can do what they want and get away with it. And that's where we have to stop. We have to hold the line and stop that.
You know, Anant, I want to get your opening comments as well, but specifically also then in your comments, respond to the last point that James made, where there is this growing tendency to make media the focus of attention. And it could be a diversionary tactic on the part of the establishment, government or otherwise, where the media becomes the story, and hence you're no longer accountable to the media to actually accurately be able to tell your story. How much of that are you seeing happen today as well?
I see there are two trends working there. So one is the collapse of business model, and what has been one of the major reasons why the business model has collapsed in the last 10 years is because the internet, which was supposed to be an equalizer. You know, 10 years ago it was thought that internet would give more space for investigative journalism, bold journalism, because you can publish more freely. But what has happened, because internet has decimated the traditional business model, most newspapers are running into losses, and that's not been replaced by something more viable. So as a result, media has become more vulnerable. It has become more vulnerable for capture by big business, by big money, by institutions. That has definitely put some fetters on traditional media's ability to carry on investigative journalism, to carry on bold journalism. The other trend that one sees is that politicians do not need media to communicate to people. Donald Trump always communicates through Twitter. Even our Prime Minister communicates directly through their social media handles. So therefore, the exclusivity that media traditionally had in terms of channel of communication between politicians, between policymakers and people, that has been undermined, and therefore they're not reliant only on one source of, or only on organized media for getting their word out. That has been I would say, has shifted the balance of power away from journalists.
It's interesting because James raised the issue of viability of the media and viability of the media being under attack. You're adding to that, and what you're saying is even more concerning, the relevance of the media. So you've got a double whammy where it's a viability issue and it's also the relevance issue. So Nidhi, where do we go from here?
Well, I slightly disagree with the point about how leaders today, some of them, including our Prime Minister, don't need the media to communicate, or the traditional media to communicate. I think they do, and they want to, which is why the photo ops are very important. And it's not just done through social media. It is whether it's done through the news agencies, it's whether it's telecasting your speeches when you're traveling abroad, ensuring that they're going to be broadcast on prime time. All of that is important. So I think for instance, what Mr. Modi is doing with the Indian media and television in particular is that he wants to engage them and with them, but he wants to do it on his terms. And what I actually find more worrying is when citizens and regular folks out there begin to also think that it's okay if our leaders are not having press conferences or not facing difficult questions and are discrediting the entire mainstream media with one brush. I think that is worrying when you think that it's okay for the communication to be one way without questioning and counter-questioning. And the moment this narrative is built that asking the government questions makes you anti-national, that to me is dangerous and not just worrying.
It is dangerous, and as I pointed out, it's not specific to India. James, we're seeing this happen in the US. Mr. Trump goes after CNN pretty much on a regular basis. He goes after individual journalists pretty much on a regular basis. His tweets call out fake news or what he sees as fake news. We're seeing this happen in Russia as well. This is, of course, a dangerous trend, but as I pointed out, that if the focus of the political establishment has been to discredit traditional media and paint all traditional media as distributors of fake news, it's also led to a crisis of confidence and a crisis of credibility in the eyes of the consumer of the media. So it's sort of, it's a black hole that we're getting sucked into. How do you see the way forward?
I think the people will find the way forward. We're now seeing popular movements in places like Hong Kong, like the Czech Republic, like in Russia recently, where people are reacting in a different way. And often that is to support the media. The country of Slovakia just turned over its government based on the assassination of a journalist. People understand that the media is the court of last resort. We are there to be the one body that will hear them when government fails them. And eventually, after they see that there is no other body that will support them, they will support the media.
Do you feel hopeful, Anant? Do you echo what we're hearing there from James? Do you think that there is a tipping point post which you believe that this normalization will start to happen?
Surely enough, because I think you can rely on organized surveys. You can also rely on anecdotal evidence. People want government to be questioned. I think there's an intrinsic need amongst most people to sort of challenge the authority, to hear people being held accountable. Even for Caravan, and we've been fairly anti-establishment. We did our own survey amongst readers, and a fair percentage, maybe up to 50% or maybe more, say that they don't agree with what Caravan writes, but yet they read the magazine. And you can see this with the support that a lot of online independent media has been receiving. the challenge, the next question as to how does it become sustainable? And that's where probably we don't have an answer yet, because right now, a lot of independent media is being supported by grants, by donations. That may be a model right now. Whether it's sustainable in the long run, we don't know yet. At least in the last few years, there is a trend of asking leaders to pay for content, which is a very healthy trend. Whether it will be sustainable enough in the years to come, I think that's where the question, we don't have an answer yet.
One of the other vulnerabilities, and I think we see this happen in the Indian context, and I know that, James, you had tweeted a cover from Russia where everyone carried, all major mainstream publications carried the same cover story in opposition to actions that the government had taken. But Nidhi, let's talk about collaboration, support, solidarity here within the Indian media space. One of the vulnerabilities that the political establishment, and I'm saying political establishment, seems to be being able to leverage is the fact that here you've got a battle within the media. Media is calling out media, whether you're on this side or that side, depending on what positions you're taking. And that is something that the government seems to be also being able to exercise and leverage on.
Exactly. You've hit the nail on the head. And that comparison with the United States and Donald Trump's sort of incessant attack on the press. One thing I really admire about the US media is how they have stood up in solidarity by and large to take on the president. And I think it's because there are systems in place. There is a certain, a work culture that is in place. The same Trump who attacks the New York Times went to the New York Times editorial board, and he will give interviews. So I think that there is a certain pillar that is in place, and you can see that that's why it's much easier there for the media to get together and fight back. It's the very opposite here, where unfortunately in the last few years in particular, you see a large section of the media has forgotten what it's there for, what their job is. You end up becoming cheerleaders for the establishment. You're not asking questions. All you do is ask questions of the opposition. All you do is create communal strife. And all you do then is just finger pointing at each other. And that is unfortunate. I think that's something that reflects, for instance, in the meetings that we have in our various associations. It's become an us versus them battle. I believe a certain channel wants to form its own federation now and doesn't want to be part of the broadcasting federation that currently exists. So we are deeply divided, and that's part of the problem, because it's one type of journalism versus a certain traditional journalism that's combative, that wants to ask questions of the establishment, and I don't know how we're going to go forward from here. It's so divided at every level. Journalists are fighting with each other on WhatsApp groups, and that, as we know, is the clearest indicator of the health of our media.
The question is why? Why isn't there enough solidarity within media in India? And I think, again, at the ownership level, I think media is so dependent on government for patronage. Government advertising is the biggest source of revenue. So at the ownership level, there is no incentive to challenge the media, challenge the political setup, whether it's the current government or the previous government.
Sure.
And it becomes worse as you go down the hierarchy of government. From national government to state government, it becomes even more controlling. Secondly, I think is, we have to get in the caste angle here, because much of the media is upper caste dominated, and I feel that they do believe, a large percentage of media, especially in non-English media, I would say, does believe in the ideology of the current government. And therefore, there is an inherent interest there are live examples where I have been told by publishers, owners who criticize Modi on every respect, but they would say, he is good for Hindus. So therefore, there is an interest, here in within the current dispensation to sort of, ally with the government at a very communal level, sadly so.
Okay. James, just to pick up that point that was made there by Anant and take it forward to a much more global context, because often we debate and discuss about how the job of the media is to be an objective storyteller. But when we're making decisions on which stories to carry, that's a subjective decision to start with. So, how do you sort of then bring in this idea of telling a story objectively when you've already made a subjective choice about which stories to carry and what not to carry, just to take the point that Anant was making forward?
Well, being objective doesn't mean that you don't believe anything. Everyone has a set of beliefs. It's just that our belief as journalists is an open and free discussion and open and free inquiry into the facts of the matter. All governments, no matter how well-intentioned, no matter how popular, tend to gravitate towards authoritarianism and self-preservation. It's natural. It's happened everywhere. It will always happen everywhere. Once you're in power, you don't really want to give it up. Our job is to remind them that it's not their power, it's the people's power.
Yeah.
Now, I have just staked out a political stance there. I believe in the power of the people, and I believe in democracy.
Yeah.
Now, does that make me an enemy of the people? Some people would say it does. Again, you don't have to be objective, you don't have to not believe in things like that. You just have to believe in looking at all of the facts and presenting them fairly.
Since we're talking about the fact that the business model seems to be broken at many levels, we're talking about a greater degree of perhaps regulatory capture and institutional breakdown, which forces journalists to perhaps second guess what they're doing, to watch their back, to be limited in what they say or choose to say because of the consequences or the fear of consequences, and relevance. So, what is the prescription of us to be able to move forward if the hope of the internet playing this big equalizer role has not played out either? What is then the hope for independent, free media?
It's bottom up. It has to come from the people, and in trusting vetted journalists, in trusting objective journalism over all of the other stuff that they can get on the internet, often for free. We can't force them to think about things. We can't force them to read only things that have been vetted and have been checked out by real journalists. All we can do is offer it. They have to come to us. And I have to believe that eventually they will. That's the way it's worked for generations. For hundreds and hundreds of years, people have sought out the most reliable information.
Yeah.
Right now, they're crazy. Right now, it's who knows what is out there and who knows what they believe. But eventually, enough people are going to say, I can't trust this stuff. I've got to go to someone I can trust. That's why we cannot lower our standards. We cannot simply chase clicks on the internet. We cannot give up all of the things that make journalism, because eventually they will come back.
Anant, do you believe that eventually they will come back? And just take a look at what's happened, for instance, with the New York Times subscription numbers and the manner in which those subscription rates are going up every year. And that gives hope to other media organizations that perhaps that is the way out of this current business of the stranglehold that you find yourself and have to rely on a certain kind of advertising money or a certain kind of political money or whatever the case may be. How hopeful do you feel?
So, Steve Cole, the Dean of Columbia Journalism School, once said they never start a sentence, or no publisher, no media organization should start a sentence with New York Times does this, because they are a basket case. They are a basket case in the global media, setup. But
they're making money.
They're doing well. They're doing well.
Yeah.
I share James' optimism, but my concern is how long will it take, and what the kind of damage it will do before things turn for the better. And even with New York Times, while we talk about how they have about, I think, 3 million subscribers now. What is happening with local American newspapers, the Dallas paper, the city newspaper used to chronicle their city's news. Because their business model is facing, and they probably cannot, most of them, I believe, haven't yet fixed their, online publishing model. What is the loss that the local community is sort of suffering, and might happen in India as well, because the big newspapers are becoming big networks are becoming big, but the small media is the one which is dying, except for the ones who are being funded on a ventilator by donations and by grants and so on and so forth.
So are we actually telling the real stories that need to be told? And and I would imagine that you will start to see less and less of that because a lot of the local sort of press is going to go out of business, or more relevant stories at least to address those communities. But Nidhi, coming back again to the state of play today, is there room for storytelling? I mean, if you look across television screens, and I'm restricting myself to television screens, if you look across television screens on prime time, there is, and again, manufactured controversy, manufactured outrage over some issue or the other. Where is the real storytelling happening? And when will the real storytelling happen? Or what will make the real storytelling happen?
Look, let's be honest. The fact is, there was a time when we had money, we had budgets where we could go into the editor's office and say, which I did, I want to go to Tibet. Sure, here's the budget, go do your documentary. Went. I want to go X place. And you could do that, go and travel to villages and do that kind of storytelling that you're talking about. The fact is today that television across the board is bleeding. We don't have that kind of money, those kind of budgets anymore to do that kind of travel, and frankly, TV channels are still investing in reporters, but not as much as they used to. So I'm at least proud that our organization is still trying to do that. We still have an entire segment of prime time which is just news stories from the field, which is not talk. And that's something I'm really proud of. But I also just want to say that even on this issue of the manufactured controversy on prime time, I think it's disgraceful what is happening in much of the media, and the kind of communal sort of tensions that they try to stoke through this. But I don't think all of them are bad. And I think it's also important to have constructive conversations about important issues. And I've talked about this before. When the Nirbhaya gang rape happened in Delhi, it was the first time I saw national television media, and therefore print media as well, talking about sexual violence against women on page 1 and as the first headline on prime time. And it was something that really stoked people to come out onto the streets and demand change. Now, whether that change happened or not is another story, but it made people angry, it made people aware. And I think if you are able to have a constructive conversation, for instance, lynching, it shouldn't fall off the map. These are real things that are happening in this country. They cannot be brushed under the carpet. We need to talk about them. So I think it's how you do it, the way you do it. It is also journalism. And given the resource constraints one faces, I think we are all just trying to, not all of us, some of us are trying to do our best to balance out both. But the concerns that you flagged about what some of the channels are doing, those are real concerns. And I don't think it's journalism. I think it's dangerous. Sometimes it's entertaining because you just laugh because it's not journalism. And most of the times it's just, I just put it on mute. I don't even see it anymore. I can't.
That perhaps is the unfortunate reality that we're faced with. But I want to pick up on the point that Nidhi made and address that with you, Anant and James. As we've discussed, the role of the media is to critique, whether it is the actions of the government or the business community or whatever you consider to be the establishment that needs to be held to account. But what about constructive conversations? What about providing solutions? Is that not also the role, responsibility, and job of the media? And are we doing enough of that?
Sure. No, of course. I came across this paper written by two, I think, media scholars, University of Missouri and Munich, and they've done a great job in outlining the role that journalism plays in public and political life, and it starts, at the extreme end is adversarial journalism, at the other extreme end is mouthpiece, a publication which is a mouthpiece of a certain organization, and in between.
Have we swung to the extremes? I mean, on the one side, there's only adversarial journalism. On the other side, there's only mouthpiece journalism or laptop journalism or whatever the current term is that we're addressing it by. Is there no space in the middle, or is there, is there no value that people see in the middle? Is that middle not being addressed?
Yeah. So the middle would be, starting from the extreme adversarial journalism to investigative journalism to critical analytical journalism to information disseminator to even media for social change, all the way to mouthpiece journalism, mouthpiece media. Except if you keep aside the mouthpiece media, I think all these media inherently, for them to be effective, need to be curated, need to be thought of from a point of view of critiquing establishment. Because whether it's investigation, whether it's analysis, whether it's information, whether it's social change, whether it's advocacy, in the underlying ethos of it, for it to be meaningful, will invariably be challenging the establishment. Now it's the framing of it.
Yeah.
The adversarial will become far more aggressive. The critique will become more argumentative. Advocacy will be again showing some, some backdrop or some, a drawback of a certain missing policy measure, or even a positive story. I mean, if you were to read, if you had two stories to read, two business stories to read, one which is a straight up, you can say, profile of a business leader without any critique, and one with a critique. As a reader, you would want to read critique. So, let's not mistake that the need for investigative journalism, the need for anti-establishment is not from the journalist or media owners' end. It's what the readers want.
Yeah.
They want to know what, how to, the first step of any improvement is acknowledgement. And that acknowledgement will come from a critical, method of inquiry.
Yeah. So let me ask you this. You talked about what you do at Caravan and the fact that readers may not agree with what you say, but they want to read what you say. So have you then seen subscription go up? Have you seen advertisers saying that they're willing to advertise on Caravan? I mean, what does it mean?
Advertisers never want to advertise in Caravan, for sure.
Don't want to advertise
no, they don't
on
want to advertise in Caravan.
Okay.
And that's why we put up a subscription paywall last year. And yes, subscriptions have been steadily growing. And it's the same reason why New York Times has now has 3 million subscribers. So the trick is not to rely on advertising as the primary revenue source. Rely on readers, one way or the other. And they would pay for journalism, that has an anti-establishment approach, an anti-establishment not just to political establishment, to business establishment, to judiciary, which is one of the toughest establishments in this country to even critique, because we are always under the threat of
Is it harder to critique the judiciary than it is the government?
More. In fact, government is the easiest. Businesses are more difficult.
Government is the easiest to critique.
Yes,
Okay.
I feel so. I mean, it's amongst the easier ones, all right. Businesses are far more difficult. Judiciary is even more sensitive. If you're a film journalist, let's for a second take a film journalist, how easy is it to criticize Kangana Ranaut? We saw that what happened. I mean, if you're a sports journalist, can you write against BCCI? Can you write against Dhoni without thinking of a backlash? So in fact, I feel the more confined you become in a genre, the more stronger the establishment becomes in that field.
Absolutely, and I'm glad that you pointed out all of those examples, because invariably you tend to think of the establishment as only the political establishment when it's much more than that. But James, on the point that was being made by Anant, you've got adversarial on one side and you've got the sort of mouthpiece media on the other side. There's space to create something viable in the middle, which also means that it's not just the content that you're creating, but it's also the tone in which you speak with your consumer that is important. And somewhere, perhaps the tonality has been lost as well, where you feel compelled to take one extreme or the other.
Yeah, that's very true, and it's, especially in opinion journalism now, especially in the United States, it's become a constant drumbeat. I open the New York Times webpage every morning, and I look down the right-hand side of the page, and I see 8 different columns, all of which are a variation of "I hate Donald Trump."
Yeah.
Now, we know that.
Yeah.
You don't need to tell us that again today in a slightly different way than yesterday.
Yeah.
We've had that for 4 years now. It's getting tedious.
Yeah.
I'm not disagreeing with it. I'm saying it's getting tedious. There are other ways to do. There are other things we can cast our lens on than just politics and just one or two politicians.
Yeah.
To talk a little bit about that place in the middle, one way to do it is to offer solutions journalism, which is now coming back into vogue, which is not advocating, when done right, but it's simply pointing out possibilities.
Yes.
You have a problem in your community, go to another community that seems to have avoided the problem, see how they did it, tell your readers about it. Tell them how it was done there. Perhaps they'll want to adopt it in your community. That's not advocacy, that's simply well-rounded journalism.
Yeah.
We can do these things, and I think people will find value in it, and they will follow along as we're doing it without upsetting them needlessly. by just simply over and over and over again telling them how wrong whatever it is wrong.
And I want to get both Nidhi and Anant to comment on that before I throw this open to the audience. And I think James has raised a very valid issue. And I think there are takers for the argument that, look, if you keep obsessing about the same story and keep telling the same story, then you diminish the impact that that story has. And perhaps the obsession, some would argue, in India with the Prime Minister or with the political establishment has perhaps led to the kind of pushback that you've seen from the consumer or the reader. Is there enough space that's been given to issues that really matter? Healthcare, education, agriculture. I mean, these are issues that matter to this country. Do we spend any time or enough time talking about this on print or on television channels? Anant, I want to start by talking to you. You know, the pushback could also be linked to the fact that you're constantly pushing down the message that you want to push down, not necessarily what the consumer, the reader wants. Where is the consumer or the reader or the viewer at the heart of the kind of journalism that is being done?
Well, I think that's a valid point. I think there is a diminishing law of diminishing marginal return, and I think beyond a point, as a reader, you don't want to hear the same criticism being leveled at the same set of people. Now, in India, because the same set of people are back in the government, there is need for us to sort of critique the establishment in other ways. Policy is, of course, one important important subject, and policy across subjects. Also, the cultural change that the country is going through, I think that's an important area of investigation and inquiry. How is the society changing? How is the current establishment backed by a body like RSS? How are they infusing cultural change? That is also a way of critiquing a certain religious establishment, if I may say. So. Yeah, I mean, I think there is enough and more reason to see that to sort of acknowledge that you can only do just that much of a certain kind of criticism against a certain set of people.
Yeah, Nidhi?
I agree with that. And I mean, I'll give you an example. For instance, the economy is right now, okay, I was going to say a bad word, but it's in bad shape. So we need to do those stories.
The economy is a bad word.
The economy is a bad word.
Apparently.
So yesterday, like for instance, I devoted my prime time show to the economy, apart from the horrific Unnao case. And it's so amazing how people will just tweet and say, oh, you're the only one you're the only guys who focused on the economy on mainstream news channels. You obviously would every day. But then it strikes you that what actually just should be something that is so simple and obvious to journalists to do, which is their job, which is to look at the fact that the economy is in expletive. Where, now for just doing our jobs, we're told, Arey wah, pat on the back. So that's not how it should be. And yes, you're right. I mean, you need to focus on farmer suicides. You need to focus on rural distress. You need to focus on unemployment. There is a whole sort of vast scale of stories that are waiting to be done out there. Even in this Unnao case, for instance, it's not just about the fact that Mr. Aditya Nath is a terrible chief minister and the fact that the political establishment has been protecting an alleged rapist legislator. It's also about the complete breakdown of the police system, of the judiciary, the failure of the judiciary. And these are the stories we need to focus on as well. These are all part of the establishment, as was pointed out, which we need to focus on. And there is not enough of that happening. It just becomes too narrow then when you only make it about Yogi Adityanath or Narendra Modi, or you have to look at everything, and not just make it about individuals.
I agree, and I've got the sign to throw this open for Q&A. I'm going to come to all of you in just 1 second. My quick last question before I throw it open to the audience. We've talked about the role of the media as one that needs to critique, one that needs to hold power to account, whatever the establishment may be. But what about the role of the media to also act as a torchlight? The role of the media to also to sort of say, hey, look, this is stuff that's going on. There's good in it. This is stuff that can be replicated. This is stuff that can be templated. This is stuff that can be taken forward. How much of that is also part of the responsibility of good journalism, and how much of that are we actually seeing happen in India and in across the world today? Anant, I'll start by asking you.
I think that's information itself is the primary role of media. Is one of the primary roles of media. I probably I'll second you on that. I don't know if I can say anything further, but whether it's being done enough, I would imagine it's being done with the diversity of media that we have. I'm pretty sure.
Are we really diverse? I mean,
well, in terms of the fragmentation, I mean, yeah. I mean, you know.
I mean, we might be fragmented, but I don't necessarily know if we're really diverse because the offering to the consumer may not necessarily be that diverse. I mean,
maybe.
Yeah. So
maybe.
I have a question mark on the diversity of what is happening, at least in India. James.
We're not anarchists. We're not there to burn the house down. We're there to make it better.
Yeah.
So, yes, we do need to point out the good. Yes, we do need to point out what's working, but we can't close our eyes to what's not.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
I don't think it's our job to be showing the light to anyone. I think it's our job to just present the facts and let people decide, what they think is right or wrong, and take that information. I don't think we have some great responsibility. We're not here to do the role of the government. We're not here to be the Prime Minister, his cabinet, or anything like that. We're here to critique. We're here to look at what's wrong, and we're also here to point out what's right. But we're not here to guide. I don't think so.
Okay. Questions from the audience and lots of hands up there. So I'm going to get a microphone across to. Let's start with the lady right here in the second row.
The question is, I think liberal journalism and the media that portrays the real state of the country has somewhat failed to market itself. The Caravan story on Judge Loya case was super important and was, it should have reached all parts of the country. But then it just happened to, be a part of only the privileged circles or those who know, who can speak English at least. NDTV has still, been there all parts of the country and in English and Hindi as well. But other good journalism houses have somewhat not been able to be there. So how do you think that, bridge the gap? Say, for example, when during the elections, 7 different mouthpieces of the government had 7 days dedicated to 7 interviews of Narendra Modi. But obviously, the liberal media houses did not get any interviews. I think the wrong side of the media is very united, but the right side of the media is somewhat disintegrated. Siddharth Varadarajan's idea of communalism is very ideal, very amazing for the country, but he has no compromises. He will just be, known. He is bad, that's it. But then there are, CNBC will, find out the balance between good and parts. So how do you think the bridging of the gap is possible?
Okay.
If I had the answer to that question, well, we've already kind of detailed in all our conversations what's wrong and what possibly can be done to change things, whether it's, these ownership models, revenue models, which are unsustainable. I just want to mention something today. Today, my colleague Ravish is the recipient of the Ramon Magsaysay Award. And
that deserves an applause, yes.
Yeah. I just want to say Ravish's award is something that is important not just for him, which it's an outstanding honor for him personally. It is for NDTV, and I think for all journalists out there who are doing a very difficult job under very difficult circumstances and questioning all establishments. So I think as long as the liberal media continues to just do that, then you will be heard. I mean, this is very important what has happened. The Ravish's Award today, it's a big message that has gone out there to fellow journalists, to the establishment, and everywhere else. And so as long as we just have to just keep doing what we have to do. I don't care about forming a union with somebody. Just do your job. Just do your job, ask questions. That's what we've forgotten to do.
Yeah, but I think that there's a larger story in that question, and Anant, maybe you can talk about that. And that really is this the reason why perhaps a big story, which is an anti-establishment story, may not move beyond a certain set of channels or news publications because of the fear of backlash, because of the fear of consequences. And that's, I think, the larger issue that she's saying, that, you might have a great story, but if it's restricted to 50,000 people who might read Caravan or whatever the case may be, how do you take that message forward? How do you make it bigger?
I think we've talked about the reasons behind that, and the reasons are same, that big media is so dependent on government or government-backed advertisers that they aren't, and and also because this government is also a little more sensitive than previous governments are. So there is no easy solution out. I don't think so I have a prescription possible in the short run. The reasons are very well known.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, solutions, hard to find. Yeah.
Hard to find. Yes, we've got questions there.
Hi. Since there seems to be a range of positivity regarding the relevance of media and how you can necessarily uphold it, my question is open in terms of how, since it was mentioned that giving in to the government is something that you must do to maintain this kind of relevance within media, how far do you think the sacrifice you need to make to the altruistic, inform all, say all sense in the media versus simultaneously limiting this media, and how valid do you think then this relevance is, and does it even have any merit to it if this is the kind of sacrifice you have to make in order to maintain that kind of relevance?
Well, I think there is definitely trust deficit amongst readers, not just in India, I think globally also there is a bit of a trust deficit, but more so in India, I would feel, at least that's what our sense would be. So it is in the long run, and unfortunately, in the long run, all of us are dead.
Yeah.
But in the long run, it is important that all media establishments, organizations, journalists maintain their relevance by doing their job, by critiquing government. That is the only answer, unfortunately. But, right now we are all living in a very myopic world because the business environment is so damn tough right now. We have to live year by year. How will we survive next year? We need the support. Media says things that they need the support of establishment for that.
Yeah.
In the long run, it is a suicide trap. But again, we are all living in a very blinkered glasses, I think.
James?
I think I understood the question. The question is, how do we continue doing this without a lot of support? If you think about it, some of the best advocacy journalism or investigative reporting has come from people who had nothing.
Yeah.
Upton Sinclair, the great American writer, wrote The Jungle, which caused the most massive reform in American governance ever. It created safe food, it created the Food and Drug Administration, it prevented people from being poisoned, it got people to think about what they expected government to do in terms of consumer protections. He made nothing. He didn't work for an established news organization. He did this on his own. He wrote a book. The book did okay, but it wasn't a fortune. He did it because it was the right thing to do.
Yeah.
And that's what more and more journalists are doing, is just the right thing regardless of what happens next. It does tend to limit the size of the field. Not everyone can afford that. But enough people will that it matters.
I agree. Yes, can we have the microphone on this side, and then we'll come back to, go ahead.
Hi, so Nidhi spoke about, at the end of the day, it's the viewers or the audience who actually decides what view to actually follow, or rather what to follow basically. So, but we all know that there are a lot of echo chambers that are going around. So from the audience or a general person's point of view, how can we escape this whole trap of echo chambers that are going around us, that I think a lot of people won't even understand or know around in general public?
Yeah.
Like, because we are in the industry, we understand these things, but people don't. So.
Yes, and then comes back to the question that I was the point that I was making about the lack of diversity. I mean, at any given point, if you turn on television screens, at least I'm talking about television, it's the same story, it's the same tonality, it'll be the same set of people that will be talking about the same set of things. So, where is the diversity, and how do you move past and beyond these echo chambers?
That's a very valid point, because I think that's something that we're facing all around the world, this danger of just talking to people like us. I think this election in particular should be a wake-up call to everyone in the media. There were, I think, a lot of people who were also in denial, for instance, about why Mr. Modi got this overwhelming mandate, that to a second time round, because they had made up their minds, before the results that he was definitely going to lose. And I realized that even before the results, when we would try and talk to some people like us about the fact that his social schemes, for instance, have actually have resonated in villages in India, the building of toilets, etc., there would be this backlash that you don't know what you're talking about. And I think that's part of the problem, that there are people who have preconceived notions about everything, and we need to, this is our wake-up call. You're right. I mean, this is where we have to wake up and try and understand what has happened and why it is happening. Because then, otherwise we're just at a loss.
Telling the story as it is. And we seem to have moved very far away from that, not just here in India, but this is sort of something that we're seeing happen for all of the reasons that we've discussed previously on the panel. Telling the story as it is, I mean, that has to be back in the heart of what we do.
Well, that, and also, I think diversity, to answer the diversity question, I think we need to sort of make the newsrooms far more inclusive in terms of
not just the stories that we tell, but also the people who are telling the stories. Yeah.
And in the morning there was a session on gender, representation within media, and from the looks of it, it seems that while there is a bias, but yet it is being corrected. But on the axis of gender. But what about ethnicity? Is there you can say the hegemony of a very small, community? Is it being challenged fast enough? And I think the diversity that we are seeking will be a byproduct of a more inclusive newsroom. Again, easy to identify the reason, but difficult to figure out the solution.
Okay, I'll take one last question. We haven't come to this side, so I'll give the gentleman here who's got his hand up. Yeah.
Hi. So my question is specifically to Nidhi. So she's been working in NDTV from quite a long time. So see, I've seen you have been reporting on Kashmir from many years now, and I've seen a change in terminology that you have been using. Like earlier you used to refer to the rebels or whatever you call them, used to write like militants. Now they are terrorists. Now the protesters have become stone pelters. And I'm just trying to understand, has the national media just surrendered in Kashmir on the account of just not having a conflict with the government? Yep. Because recently, I'd like to point out to a couple of examples. Like Asif Sultan is a Kashmiri journalist. He was imprisoned and he's still in prison. He's been in the prison for the past 8 months.
Yeah.
Then Fayaz Kallu, the editor of Greater Kashmir, the most read newspaper in Kashmir, he was questioned by the NIA, the National Investigating Agency. He was questioned for 4 days. So there has been no reporting on it. There has been no reporting on the United Nations Human Rights Council's reports on Kashmir.
Yeah.
So has the national media and your particular organization surrendered in Kashmir?
Okay.
Firstly, as far as my organization is concerned, no, we have not. And on my personal views of terrorists and stone pelters, etc., the problem with Kashmir, and you and I can sit for lunch and have that discussion later because it will go on for the whole day, is that everyone likes to create binaries. You are either this or you're that, either you're nationalist or you're separatist. So I don't fall into those binaries, okay? And I have always maintained that anyone who kills people in the name of some cause, I'm sorry, I think that is terrorism. And I think the people of Kashmir have suffered immensely because of that. At the same time, I have always been deeply sympathetic to what has happened in Kashmir, to people. I don't agree with the militaristic approach to it. I believe that the only way is to sit down and talk to stakeholders. So that's my view. As far as whether the national media has, of course it has. The national media is demonizing Kashmiris. That is not okay. And I think the narrative that you see playing out on television channels in particular is dangerous. It is making ordinary Kashmiris more angry towards the Indian state. It has made them despise the Indian state. And I don't think that's healthy. I mean, all Kashmiris are being painted in one brush. And that's not what Kashmiris are. I am also a Kashmiri. So, I completely agree with you. They will only put out the narrative of the NIA. They will only put out the narrative of what the Home Ministry is putting out there, with some exceptions. There are still people going out there to try and understand what is happening in a conflict zone like this, and what people think. But I would just caution that don't paint everyone in the same brush. while I agree with a larger point that you're making.
Even though the media, by the way, reports with sweeping generalizations, which is unfortunate. But last 1 minute, I know, last minute, I promise you, last minute, James, I'll start by asking you, because the larger issue that the gentleman raised there was also this business of self-censorship on the part of the media, because a story is too hot to handle, or because you fear the consequences and the backlash from the establishment, whatever the establishment may be. Are you seeing more of this kind of self-censorship on the part of the media today than you did?
I don't know that it's more. I think it's always been there.
Anant, always been there, more today?
I think in the larger scheme of things, definitely media is more critical of the government than it was 30 years ago. I wasn't there 30 years ago, but from what you read about media 30 years ago, I think it was far more. It was governed a lot more by what government was wanting to say than it is now. But again, that is not to say that we are under some big threats right now.
Okay, so
I'm giving you a 30-year experience.
Despondent or optimistic about the road ahead?
Little despondent.
Little despondent. Nidhi?
Well, I'd like to be hopeful, but I don't know. I really don't know anymore.
James?
Hopeful but guarded optimism.
Hopeful but guarded optimism. That's a good note to end this conversation on. I think there are many issues don't have easy or simplistic solutions, but I think if the free, independent media has to flourish, we need to also introspect and look at issues that deal with being relevant to the audience that we hope to address, and I think that is part of the journey that must be covered as we move forward. James Wright, Anant and Nidhi, many thanks for joining us. Thank you very much for your questions as well as your comments today.